So hang on a second. So welcome everyone to the first session of the evening. I see some people are already nibbling just to be have the right kavanah for this session, Rabbi Shalom. I'd like to introduce Rabbi Shalom Bochner, who is somebody I've known for a little while, and I'm looking forward to knowing much better within the next few months. Rabbi Shalom is, if you don't know, stepping in to be the new rabbi at B'nai Israel Jewish Center in Petaluma, beginning full-time in July as the spiritual and educational director of the operation. He has more than 30 years of experience with formal and informal Jewish education, having worked at congregations, summer camps, youth groups, and as the director and rabbi for Santa Cruz Hillel. Rabbi Shalom is currently concluding 10 years at Congregation Beth Shalom, the Center for Jewish Life in Modesto, California, and he is joining us from his office in Modesto. Rabbi Shalom, welcome. It's an honor to have you here.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here and to move into this wonderful holiday with you. The full name of this session is Experiencing Revelation in Your Mouth and Heart. Why do we eat cheesecake and blintzes on Shavuot? So if you are eating such things or planning to eat such things or wanting to eat such things, that's all good. And please do keep eating during my session because I'll be eating in just a little bit. So please get it started right now. And what I want to begin with is every Jewish holiday has its unique foods and tastes. And Shavuot has an ancient association with dairy products, but also with bread. And what we're going to do in the next bit is look at some of the texts behind these traditions and understand how we can experience the gift of Torah with our mouths and stomachs, not just our brains and hearts. And as I put into the overview of the class, while food samples are cannot be guaranteed over Zoom, please do enjoy nosh while we learn. And I want to start with the words of Debbie Friedman from her Latka song. And excuse me as I try to sing without the guitar. Every holiday has food so special. I'd like to have that same attention too. I do not want to spend life in this blender, wondering what I'm supposed to do. Matzah and charoset are for Pesach. Chopped liver, vegan chopped liver and challah for Shabbat. Blintzes on Shavuot are delicious, and gefilte fish no holidays without. I am a latke. We'll finish the song on Hanukkah. But the point is that every holiday has these foods. So what is the backstory of Shavuot having its foods? Why are we eating cheesecake, blintzes, cream cheese? And what's with the ancient connection with bread? So in the chat is a source sheet. You don't need to look at it. I'd much rather prefer to see each other than to have everyone lost in a screen of words. So everything.
Rabbi Shalom, I'll let you know that we accidentally have the wrong handout.
Don't open that. Don't open that.
Don't open it, or Rabbi Diane Elliott will pop right out. So we will get that lined up in a moment.
At some point, there's a source sheet, but you really don't need it. I'm going to read through most of the texts with us and then save a few minutes at the end for conversation. But there's a lot of really fun, juicy stuff to get into. And I want to start with Sefer Shmot, the book of Exodus, chapter 34, in a passage that comes shortly after the story of the golden calf and Moshe's reaction to the golden calf and God's forgiveness. Here's what is stated in chapter 34, verse 25 to 28, if you're a Safaria junkie and want to look it up. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, and the sacrifice of the feast of Passover shall not be left until morning. The choice bikurim, first fruits of your soil, you shall bring to the house of your God. You will not boil a baby in its mother's milk, a baby animal in its mother's milk. And God said to Moses, write down these commandments, for in accordance with these commandments, I make a covenant with you and with Israel. And he, Moses, was there with God 40 days and 40 nights. He ate no bread and drank no water. He wrote down on the tablets the terms of the covenant, the Aseret HaDibrot. What's so fascinating about this text is it is not only the first mention of the holiday we now know as Shavuot in the discussion of bringing your first fruits, because that's the other name of the holiday, Chag HaBikurim, holiday of the first fruits, the holiday of bringing the grains that were harvested after the winter rains. Early grains were brought in Passover in the form of eating matzah. Later grains were brought on Shavuot. And this is really marking this holiday as a harvest festival. The connection of Shavuot with the giving of the Ten Commandments in the Torah is a later rabbinic interpretation of the Torah. But what's so fascinating is in this first mention of Shavuot, we not only see its connection to Passover occurring, as we know today, 7 weeks after Passover started, but we also have a connection with the Ten Commandments, and we even have a connection of bread and water. But here in the context of Moshe did not eat bread. And if that wasn't enough of all these different overlapping themes, we have a mention of milk here in the form of the statement, do not boil a baby animal in its mother's milk. So this is a fascinating proof text that not only introduces the holiday, but begins to plant the seed, as it were, about its connections with food, specifically potentially with milk, and its connection in the rabbinic tradition with the giving of the Ten Commandments. If we move forward a little bit into the Torah, and we'll take a look at Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, specifically chapter 23, verse 15 to 17. Again, all of these sources are in the sheet, which you can look at later, print out later, do with it whatever you want. But let me just read from that second text, because here is a expanded version of the origin of Shavuot. And it says in chapter 23, and from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, which in this case is referring to Passover, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to God. You shall bring from your settlements 2 loaves of bread as an elevation offering. Each shall be made of 2/10 of a fine measure of choice flour, baked after leavening as bikurim, first fruits to God. So here we get the name of the holiday, the festival of Shavuot. Here we have an explicit connection with Passover's observed. 7 complete weeks of the Omer are counted. The 50th day, which is tonight at sunset, is Shavuot. But we have some other important details. We really see the agricultural and the food basis of Shavuot in understanding the rituals of the season. Passover, the main ritual offering was the Passover sacrifice, the roasted lamb, eaten with bitter herb, symbolizing slavery, and matzah, symbolizing both freedom and the bread of persecution. And the main food item of Passover is obviously unleavened bread, matzah, to the point that the holiday is interchangeably called Chag HaPesach, the holiday of the Passover offering, and Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of unleavened bread. What do you do on the second day of Passover? You bring a sheaf of grain and you wave it. Now, wave offerings are all over the Torah. Today, we still do wave offerings, particularly on Sukkot, where we take the lulav and the etrog, the 4 sacred species, and wave and shake them in kind of a aboriginal rain dance. This is a reminder of a much larger system of wave offerings. And it's as if to say, hey, God, I don't have so much of this stuff. I've planted my crops, the rains have fallen, and now I just need to wait. And I don't know about you, but for me, waiting is one of the hardest things to do. And the Torah ritualizes this waiting rather than just being stressed. Count days. And when you get to the end of your count, not only will hopefully there be the next harvest, the end of the winter grains being harvested, but you will bring them now in the form of a bread offering. So we have a matzah offering, 49 days, the 50th day is a bread offering. And that is the meaning of bringing the bikurim, the first fruits. In many kibbutzim to this day in Israel, agricultural communities, they are celebrating the beginning of summer with bringing a harvest, but we know that the main harvest will obviously be after the summer in fall. But this is the season for harvesting the grain and turning it into bread. And we can see this in our own Mediterranean climate. All of these incredible rains we had turned everything green. And now it's happening to all those grasses and grains. They're turning brown. If that's wheat that's growing on the hills, it probably isn't. But if it is, you need to harvest that wheat before it goes bad, turn it into flour, turn it into bread. So we not only have a more detailed analysis of Shavuot from the book of Leviticus, we can see its explicit connection with bringing a bread offering. Okay, how does that get us to cheesecake and Blintzes? And for that, I turn to a wonderful article from myjewishlearning.com. If you're not familiar with My Jewish Learning, strongly encourage you to go down the rabbit hole that it is of articles on every Jewish holiday from a wonderful, thoughtful variety of perspectives. And there's an article there by Leslie Copeland-Ross called Why Dairy on Shavuot? A survey of the many explanations given for the tradition of eating milk products. And I want to read through a chunk of this article with you. Again, it's linked in on the source sheet. And by the way, it is from originally the Complete Jewish Holiday Handbook printed by Jason Aronson. Sorry, Celebrate the Complete Jewish Holiday Handbook. Here's what Leslie writes. Although everyone agrees that the food choice of Shavuot is cheese, most typically Blintzes, or a Sephardi equivalent such as borekas, there are differences of opinion, some quite charming, as to why it is a custom. Some derive the practice of eating dairy directly from scripture, saying that we eat dairy to symbolize the land, quote, flowing with milk and honey. Exodus 3:8, as promised to the Israelites. Quick pause. The milk discussed in the Torah is likely goat or sheep milk. And the honey is not bee's honey, it's very likely date honey, because that was the main source of honey associated with the land of Israel. So we have a land flowing with goat and sheep milk and date honey. We also have in Song of Songs, milk and honey are under your tongue. These passages, along with Psalms, the precepts of God are sweeter than honey, also indicate that we should eat honey on Shavuot, customary in some communities. A sage discovered that the initials of the 4 Hebrew words in Numbers 28, which describe the sacrificial meal offering on Shavuot, spell out me chalav, from milk, suggesting that dairy food is the acceptable dinner for the festival. At Sinai, the Israelites were considered to be as innocent as newborns, whose food is milk. We'll say more about that phrase in a moment. She continues, those of Kabbalistic mystical bent equate the numerical value of the word chalav, milk, which is 40. Chet is 8, lamed is 30, vet is 2. And what is 40? The number of days Moses spent on Mount Sinai, receiving the 10 Commandments and the other teachings, which is what we're commemorating tonight and tomorrow. Others look to the mountain itself. We know it as Sinai. The Torah occasionally also calls it Horeb, but it is ascribed in Psalms and Tehillim as Gavnunim, particularly in Psalm 68:15, meaning many peaks or like a series of hills, a givah. They connect that description with the Hebrew word gavina, meaning cheese. So the Torah was given on a mountain whose name reflects the name cheese. Isn't that great? Scholars who trace all Jewish customs and rituals to practices common among various ethnic groups previous to ours, or simultaneous to ours, claim that spring harvest festivals characteristically featured dairy dishes, perhaps because cheese was produced during that season. To this day, this is when flocks are having their young, milk production is up, and it's an easy available time for cheese. A little bit more from her article. There's also support for the custom based on the spiritual development among the Israelites in the wake of Sinai. So remember, our ancestors are there. They hear the Aseret HaDibrot, as we'll reenact and relive tomorrow morning, and then they went back to their tents. So she explains, after the Torah was given, they were obligated to follow its laws. The rabbis say they didn't just get the Aseret HaDibrot, they got all 613 commandments as a package deal, and those laws included those governing dietary practice. As they returned to their camp from Revelation, and going to pause in the article, what do Jews do after everything? Get a bite to eat. They discovered as they returned to their tents, back to the article, they could not eat their previously prepared meat, which had not been done according to the laws of kashrut dietary restrictions. The animals had not been killed necessarily by hand in a quick and painless manner. Since butchering and cooking fresh meat would take too long for the tired, hungry Israelites who had to wake up early to listen to God at Mount Sinai, they took the dairy food that was readily available. Okay, we'll hold off on the pastrami. We'll make some nice cheese dishes. Symbolizing modesty, the dairy was also seen as appropriate for the occasion of receiving the Torah, which should always be approached with humility. So, today being vegetarian, being vegan is fairly common, particularly in our part of the world. But in previous times, this was seen as a sign of humility to not eat meat and to just subsist on something simple like dairy products. Let me finish reading from our article. In some Jewish communities, it is customary to follow the traditional dairy meal of Shavuot with a meat dish. After waiting the requisite 30 minutes per the laws of kashrut, except in places where the rabbis waive the normal separation. The two foods, the dairy meal and the meat meal, represent the two loaves brought on the festival. Remember, that was the original instruction in the times of the tabernacle: bring two freshly baked loaves from this first of the grains. We are supposed to eat meat as a contribution to our joy on a festival day. This can cause practical problems, however, not only in terms of the time lapse, because we do not mix milk and meat dishes and utensils. Therefore, it is more common to have a dairy meal on the first evening of Shavuot, representing the first bread that was brought to the tabernacle and later the temple, and then meat on the second day of the festival, representing the second loaf of bread. Here's how she concludes her article. Along with Blintzes and berekas, cheesecake is a widely popular Shavuot item. Some eat kreplach, three-cornered dumplings that are often filled with meat, but can be cheese-filled or even vegetable-filled, basically a triangular ravioli, kind of a combination of a hamantaschen and a ravioli, except cheese-filled. They are supposed to remind us of the Bible, the Tanakh, which is divided into Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. It's an edible reminder of the holiday. We're not only celebrating getting the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 statements, but Torah and prophets and writings. And this was given to Israel through Moses, who was the third child of Amram after Aaron and Miriam. And it followed 3 days of preparation after they arrived at Sinai. And Shavuot occurs in the third month of the year. So that's 4 threes, the 3 sections of the Tanakh given to a third born after 3 days of preparation in the third month of the year. And again, you can read the article and learn more about the author on mydewishlearning.com. Okay, what that brings us to is me needing to find my next source sheet. Hold on, here we go. Okay, so in review, and then there's 2 texts I want to look at and then take your comments and questions. We have a holiday that is originally described as the Festival of First Fruits, a grain festival. It is then described in more detail as Chag HaShavuot, not because it lasts a week or weeks, because it comes after 7 weeks. In fact, in Israel and in other communities, it's only a one-day holiday. In other places, it's 2, but it is one of our shorter holidays. But it comes after 7 weeks of preparation, which relate to the agricultural cycles of you've planted the crops, the rains have fallen, now we wait, hopefully the crops are there. And according to the Torah, we turn them into a bread offering, which is to create a counterpart with matzah eaten before the 7 weeks of the Omer, fresh bread brought for Shavuot. And due to all of these fascinating backstories, the symbolism is connected with dairy products. Notice that there is not one exact explanation. There are 4 or 5 kind of playful explanations, because nowhere in the Torah does it say, thou shalt eat blintzes and cheesecake on Shavuot. But these very first references to the holiday do reference milk and the 10 Commandments and bread, which brings me to an amazing teaching by Rav Yoel Ben Nun, And this comes from etzion.org. And again, in the handout is the web link to the larger article that this came from. Just going to read a little bit of it because it's a fascinating way of understanding these as bookends to the Omer. Which itself, by the way, is worthy of a much lengthier discussion because the Omer has mystical explanations, agricultural explanations, spiritual and historical explanations, and he kind of touches on that in this piece here. He writes as follows: while Pesach and Shavuot are linked by the counting of the Omer, they differ radically in their relationship to chametz and matzah. On Pesach, chametz is forbidden, and matzah is compulsory, chametz being leavened bread. While on Shavuot, we offer 2 loaves of chametz, puffed up leavened bread. How are we to understand this? A proper explanation of the significance of chametz and matzah, analyzing the various sources that appear in the Torah, shows that these are all details of a complete unified system. Let me pause for one moment, then reading his article. In other words, to understand Shavuot, we have to understand Passover. To understand Passover, we have to understand Shavuot and Sukkot. It's all a totality. That's why I started with Debbie Friedman's song. Every holiday has its foods, but their significance is compared to the other holidays. In other words, you can't just do one Jewish holiday and say, okay, I've had my Jewish food. No, you've had the Jewish food of that particular holiday, and more likely that particular community observing that particular holiday. Sephardim, Mizrahim, Ashkenazim, Italian, Ethiopian, all of different foods. So to truly experience Jewish cuisine and culture means you have to not only do all the holidays, but all the various global Jewish cuisines that celebrate that holiday. It's all a unified system, which is a great way of saying our desire to eat goes way, way, way back. It's literally commanded in the Torah at certain occasions. You must eat this. You have to eat this. It makes sense that we're people that spend so much time talking about food and talking while we're eating food. Back to the article. In order to understand all the different appearances of chametz and matzah in the Torah, which, by the way, is way beyond just Passover and Shavuot, we need to uncover the essential unifying concept behind chametz and matzah. Leaven, chametz, and also honey, which is the jam of the sweet fruits, the dates of the land of Israel, represent the completed product of the farmer's work. Let me say that again. It's a key line. Leavened breads, chametz, and honey represent the completed product of the farmer's work. Both chametz bread, leavened bread, and the ripe sweet fruits express the end of the successful process. They therefore also symbolize the wealth and success, the abundant divine blessings of a person who has seen the realization of that which he has visualized at the start and which he pursued until he achieved it. So pause the article for a moment. What an amazing understanding that when you eat a loaf of bread, that's the completion of a huge process. And the same thing applies to that Blintzes and the cheesecake. Someone had to plant those seeds. Someone had to water them. Someone had to take care of them, understand exactly when was the right time to harvest them, turn them into the flour, turn them into the cheese, turn them into whatever, let alone the packaging and the shipping and the selling and then the buying and then the making of all this. And then finally, the eating. It's the realization of all of those different blessings along the way that culminated in the successful moment of, this is good. Matzah, in contrast, go back in time 7 weeks, represents a station in mid-process, before the end result is achieved. It represents a deficiency that is waiting for completion. Salt, which must accompany every meal offering according to the Torah, and we still put it on every challah on Shabbat and holidays, also expresses a raw, primal substance unprocessed by human hands. It's entirely a gift from God. So matzah is like a raw material. It's not really finished. It's 18 minutes, some water, some baking, you're done. And salt, this other offering item, it's completely raw. We don't do anything to it other than maybe grind it. He concludes this piece of the article with this. We may expand this idea somewhat and propose that matzah, both practically and symbolically, is a poor man's bread. Lechem oni, the bread of persecution, the Torah calls it. It is the bread of someone who lacks the ability and resources to bring the material process to its completion in the form of a full leavened loaf. So Passover is birth. And we know that things don't always go easy and smooth. And our ancestors were forced to rush out of Egypt from the narrow place, not fully ready. All of this is about a sense of incompletion. And Chametzi explains, the leavened bread, the bread of this holiday, that's what allows the dough to rise and form a rounded cake, is the symbol of the wealthy person, of means and power. They have the time to let the dough rise. They have the means to have all the materials that they need with them and not worry, there'll be no flour, there'll be no water, I got to make it all now. No, you can take your time with it and enjoy it as a reminder of the blessing that we have. Now, all of that brings us to the last text that I want to share. And I have to say, it's a wow text, because what it does is bring all of this together. The dairy understanding of Passover, the bread understanding of Passover, and the deeper understanding of Passover as a holiday of revelation, which, as this particular Tikkun Leil is focused on, it being an ongoing process. So all of these strands that we've kind of hinted at, including the theme of this Tikkun Leil, comes together in an amazing text from the book Kli Yakar, the precious vessel, which is also the nickname of the person who wrote it. That's the way it goes in the Middle Ages. You wrote a book, you became known as that book. So the author of the Kli Yakar, the person's actual name, is Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim ben Aaron Lunshitz, and he was born in Poland in 1550 and became the rabbi and passed away in Prague in 1619. And here's what he writes, and it's short, but I'm going to read it slow because he squeezes in so much. And then take your comments and questions. He writes, then you shall bring an offering of new grain to God. He's describing Shavuot. It is a sign for the day of the giving of the Torah. So bringing bread, according to him, is a sign of the giving of the Torah. How so? Since the Torah must be new to a person on every day, as if he received it on Mount Sinai. So bread, as we all know, is bought fresh. You want to go to the bakery and smell that fresh baked aroma. And so bread is connected with Shavuot because Torah is connected to Shavuot. And both Torah and bread are best received new. I mean, I could stop right there and feel like we have more than enough of this text, but he has even more to say. And that which is not mentioned explicitly in the Torah, that this day is the day of the giving of the Torah, and so too, it is not mentioned explicitly in the Torah that Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment and teshuvah. And he's going to explain why. He says, before I get into this, let me remind you that it's a rabbinic understanding that this is the anniversary of the Ten Commandments. It's not mentioned in the Torah that this day of Shavuot is when we were there at Sinai. And he says it's also not mentioned that Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment and teshuvah. In fact, the name Rosh Hashanah does not even appear in the Torah. The Torah calls it Yom HaZikaron Yom Teruah, a day of remembrance, a day of shofar blasting. The rabbis call it Rosh Hashanah. So why are these things both not mentioned explicitly in the Torah? The reason for both of them is the same. Both things can be explained in one. That about the giving of the Torah. God did not want to limit it to one specific day, since it must be similar to a person as if each and every day of the year he received it on that day from Mount Sinai. Okay, let me explain what he's saying, because it's an amazing idea. If the Torah said this was the day that Torah was given, and this is the day that you're forgiven and judged and do teshuvah, then we think, okay, as long as I do that on that day and that thing on the other day, I'm done. And he says, no, that's not the way it works. It has to be every day. So if the Torah said this is the day that Torah was received, you'd only focus on Torah one day of the year. That wouldn't be sufficient. That wouldn't feed us. And likewise, if God said Rosh Hashanah, that's the day you're judged and that's the day you do teshuvah, then the rest of the time we'd be jerks knowing that, look, I'm only judged on one day of the year, so it doesn't matter the rest of the time. So the same thing, that God did not limit it to just one day, because both Torah and becoming who we're meant to be, returning to our true best selves and being judged and judging ourselves, these are things that need to happen every day. As in truth, our rabbis, may their memory be blessed, he writes, said in the Talmud that the Torah is in fact compared to a breast, that all the time that infant presses on it, it brings out a new flavor. So too the Torah. Anyone who ponders it brings out a new explanation every day. Let me pause and let us think about this. He's saying, not only do we want fresh bread, we want fresh Torahs. We want to ponder it every day. And likewise, when a baby is nursing, the baby doesn't say, well, I nursed yesterday, I don't need to nurse today. Obviously, the baby wants to nurse. We all need nourishment. The baby has an amazing ability to be fed instantly as compared to us. We got to go to the grocery store, go to the restaurant, make the food. The baby can just nurse and immediately receive it. And it is received with such flavor. And likewise with us, every time we ponder Torah, it brings out a new taste every day, which thankfully we're doing because we don't think the Torah was only given as a one-day event, the same way we don't think that Teshuvah and judgment are a one-time event. Therefore, it is correct, he writes, that it be similar to him as if he received it today at Mount Sinai. The new wisdom that we acquire when we read a good book, go to Torah study, listen to a class, go to a Shabbat morning service, go to a Tikkun Leil, it's so new to us. It's the feeling of I'm receiving it right now. I'm there at Sinai. And on some level, since all of our souls were there at Sinai, and since God as a source of infiniteness was there, then not only were we there, but we're still there. It's happening right now. And every time we receive a new insight, it's a moment of being back there at Sinai. And if so, every day is the day of the giving of the Torah for those who ponder it. So it's like saying, Earth Day is every day. Shavuot is every day. Every day should be a day of connecting with Torah. Therefore, it is not fitting to limit its giving to one specific day. That's why the Torah didn't say this was the day it was given, because it is constantly being received. And therefore, our rabbis, may their memory be blessed, said the following in the Midrash, that the words of Torah should be new to you, and not like an old thing that the heart of a person is sick of. And in truth, you find a novelty in it on each and every day. And therefore, the day of its giving is nowhere elucidated in the Torah, more than that which is hinted in the bringing of the new bread offering, to teach that the Torah is a new offering on each and every day. And the only thing I can possibly add to that before I take your comments and questions is this notion of not only should it be like the fresh bread that comes to us with great anticipation from the oven or from the bakery, but as we enjoy that cheesecake, can we relate that to the words of Torah that are like being nourished from the breast of God, the creator, the Shekhinah, the source of wisdom and all nourishment in the world? That's what this holiday is about, at least according to the Kli Yakar. And now we got plenty of time for some comments and questions while you're eating.
Would you like people to go ahead and unmute and ask their questions?
Let me take a look at what's in the chat now. Let's see. Some of it there'll be breakas tomorrow. Excellent. It's some questions about where's the handout. There it is. Honey in the tea. Exactly. When you're having your coffee and tea tonight, put some honey in and be reflecting of the land of milk and honey. I would say if you got something to ask or say, just chime in. Yeah. Or we'll just look at each other in silence, which will be less productive. Who's got a comment? Who's got a question?
Terrific. Fabulous. The actual essence. We know that you've spoken the truth and we're eating it.
Thank you. I mean, look, there's nothing more complimentary than for someone to take a break from eating to say something. So
It was hard, but I did it. Yeah.
and all,
Dorothy. I'm sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was
Rabbi
gonna
Shalom.
say, I think of this as the festival of the barley harvest. So when you talk about bringing the bread offering at Shavuot time, would that have been a barley bread? Or would it have
Probably was a barley bread. It may have been a barley bread mixed with the previous grains, because Passover was likely the winter flour grains being harvested. But it's a shame that we don't have the recipes. I mean, for some of the offerings we have exactly, there was a pan-fried offering, which just must have been incredibly delicious. But there's so many of these details that how exactly did they make the showbread? How exactly did they make the bread offering of Shavuot? And the Talmud, it seems like every couple of pages keeps talking about kutach, which is some kind of Babylonian cheese dip. And yet nowhere does it give us a recipe. So, but to answer your question, we imagine that, yes, this bread was barley based.
Okay.
Adam,
Yeah.
Adam Kinsey, you've got a question.
Yeah, I do. I didn't know I raised my hand, but I do. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi. And first of all, this makes me think of just the process of talking about, especially in regard to the why we eat dairy, makes me think of the phrase "we will do and we will hear." In that we are eating cheesecake, and then we're going to back into this and figure out why we're eating cheesecake. So that seems to be in there. I was wondering about, I heard recently, and I wish I knew, I'm wondering about, there's almost an implication of Passover and also the Festival of Matzah are almost two different holidays in the Torah. And I heard someone recently calling it for a return to having that separate holiday for the matzah itself. And I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about that in there as sort of a bridge in that whole process.
So I really appreciate the first thing that you said, that often in Judaism, we know of the custom, then we need to go back and figure out the reason. And even when the Torah says to do something, it often doesn't tell us why. And so look at all of the beautiful wisdom that went into figuring out what's the significance of bringing bread on Passover. We know that on Shavuot, we know that we bring it, but this is why we don't just read the Torah once. We read it over and over again with the accompaniment of 3,000 years of rabbinic wisdom that can fill in some of those missing pieces, which will allow us to have that chidush, that aha moment of realizing something new, which is like, the equivalent, to keep the analogy going, of making a dish for the first time or coming up with your own recipe. In terms of Chag HaPesach and Chag HaMatzot, yes, there's absolutely an understanding. It's not universally agreed, but it is certainly a good theory that Pesach was a one-night event, and Chag HaMatzot is the 7-day festival that adjoins it. And the Torah does seem to kind of match this. And what's so interesting, if that is true, is that the only time that we are required to eat matzah is at the night of Pesach. For the rest of Chag HaMatzot, we are required to not eat leavened bread. And if we're eating bread, it must be matzah, but there's no requirement of eating matzah on Chag HaMatzot. There's just the requirement of not eating chametz. Whereas Chag HaPesach, whose main event is the Seder, and in ancient times it was the offering of the Passover lamb, that can only be eaten with bitter herb and matzah. So it's a great way of looking at these details of the Torah and realizing really what we're talking about is 4 overlapping holidays: the night of Pesach, the 7 days of Chag HaMatzot, which begin the 49 days of the Omer, which conclude with Shavuot on the 50th day. And that cycle of time is, of course, only the first half of the entire holiday cycle, which concludes with Sukkot. And before Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So understanding the arc of all of these holidays from Pesach, Chag HaMatzot, the Omer, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, all of that, kind of like the article suggested, is a totality. And yes, it really does make sense to see Passover in this way, particularly because Passover is unique, that it has bookended Yom Tov days, holiday days within the holiday, with Chol HaMoed in the middle. No other holiday has that. Sukkot begins with a holiday and then ends with a separate holiday, which is both connected and separate, Shmini Atzeret. And Shavuot has no middle day because it's only 1 or 2 days long. So again, all of this is a fascinating system that I'd encourage people to really see the totality of and understand that we are at the middle of it right now. And actually the high holidays, we think of it as the new year, that's actually the conclusion of the cycle, because it's the new moon of the 7th month. And understanding that here we are in the beginning of the 3rd month completely changes, but also helps our understanding of the Jewish calendar.
Rabbi Shalom, I want to make sure that you saw Tish Levy's comment. She says, Toda Rabba, great presentation. When I was studying to become Jewish 23 years ago, I was told I had to eat Blintzes and cheesecake at Shavuot. I said, well, that's tough, but if that's what I have to do to become Jewish, I guess I'll just have to do it.
Wow. I think of it as optional. I don't think of it as a commanded activity, but clearly your teacher was very machmir, very precise about these things. Look, I guess that begs the question, is a bialy, a requirement? Is lox and bagel a requirement? And by the way, since we're talking about food, much of what we're describing, to be clear, is foods of surrounding peoples that we have appropriated, with a couple of exceptions. Matzah is uniquely Jewish, and thus the matzah ball is uniquely Jewish. Challah may in fact be borrowed in terms of a braided egg bread, may not be explicitly Jewish, but the bialy is. So unleavened matzah and leavened bialy is truly a Jewish invention. I can't comment on pastrami at the moment. More comments, more questions. Yes, Lilith.
Yeah, well, I guess this is wonderful. Thank you. But I'm a little bit questioning. You said this goes back 7,000 years.
I don't think I used that phrase.
Oh, okay. Good.
The giving of the Torah would, again, it's hard to put an exact date on things other than the 6th day of the month of Sivan. But Abraham was believed to have lived about 3,800 years ago, which would put to the time of Moses around 3,500 years ago. We're in the year 5783, but that is calculated from the end of creation, the conclusion of the 7th day, the original Sabbath. Right. So the 8th day that we're now living in, so to speak, began 5,783 years ago. But yeah, 7,000 years is
yeah, all right, 4,000 or 5,000 years, whatever. I just I didn't even realize that animals had been so domesticated and food and crops had been that domesticated so many years ago.
What's so fascinating is it's always incredible when science and archaeology lines up with the Torah's and the Tanakh's account of things. Not only the historical events at the time of near and after King David, which are literally, we have the archaeological record from them specifically, but we don't have an archaeological record for the time of Abraham and the time of Moses, specific to them. But we certainly have an understanding that about 5,000-6,000 years ago is the beginning of modern civilization. So that does kind of, the timeline does make sense. And certainly at the time of the Bronze Age, when Moses, Miriam, and Aaron would have lived, yes, the domestication of animals and agriculture and the baking of bread were established principles. One of the oldest foods, of course, was beer. Before we ate the bread, we drank it. And again, that dates from around the same period, around 6,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
But I'm no expert in archaeology, but from what I've read, the timeline does make sense. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's incredible to me. Thank you.
I see Elizabeth is unmuted. Elizabeth, did you want to ask a question?
No, thank you. Not at this point.
Oh,
Maybe soon, who knows?
I do actually.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
please.
Ari.
Ari.
It's you speaking of the breast and leaning and a newborn pressing in. I remember learning when my children were little that the mother or the parent producing the milk, it produces the exact nutritional needs at that moment. It's very complex and yet incredibly simple, that exactly what the infant, young child needs nutritionally is what's produced. It's amazing.
It is amazing. Go ahead.
And comparing that to the idea of us leaning into Torah, that we get exactly what we need for nourishment at that moment. That it isn't just this arbitrary, we're leaning into what we're called into. So I loved you using that saying of sort of leaning in.
Well, thank you for that beautiful comment. And I love the Kli Yakar giving that analogy. And I love what you've just said. It resonates very strongly with me that anytime we engage in Torah study, any weekly portion, any holiday reading has in it the lesson that we need at that moment, including the question and the wrestling and the struggle that we may have at that moment. It might not be an easy answer, but it gives us what we need, even if it's in the form of a question and further wrestling. And I think Ali was saying something. Yes.
First of all, thank you for that, Ari. And that actually inspired a thought in me that cows used to be very much parts of the family, even like living in the houses with us. And I wonder if that also carries over to cows in ancient times or even in modern times, if they are that closely connected with the family, where they also have a more nutritious value in providing exactly what's needed for that situation by being more incorporated into it.
Thank you for that comment and question. We'll wrap up with this. Yes, obviously our ancestors lived in close connection, much closer connection than most of us do, with the seasons, with the agricultural cycles, with the produce, with the animals. And a beautiful example of this is in the longest list of holidays in the Torah. Right before it, we have the discussion of how animals are to be offered. And one of the statements is that an animal cannot be offered on the same day as its mother. And on one hand, okay, you read it and you quickly get on to the next section about the holidays, but think about that for a moment. That requires that you don't look out at a herd, you look out at individuals, and you need to know who is related to which one. The same way that we are to have a relationship with the trees and celebrate the birthday of the trees, we are to have a deep awareness that these are sentient beings. We are not only not to eat their blood, which is seen as their life force, but we are to have a relationship with them that values the relationships that they have with their mothers. And what a beautiful teaching to conclude with, that's one of the reasons that we say a blessing every time we eat food. The awareness that this is nourishing us, and it is a connection that we have with God. And we can find that connection obviously through gatherings such as this with each other. We can find this connection with the Torah. And ideally, we can find it every time we go out into the woods and the fields and the pastures and where the animals and plants are, and understand that each of them in their own way are a face of God.
Rabbi Shalom, this room is about to close on us, but I want to thank you. This was so rich and so deep. It was so not just about the food on the plate, but went so deep. Thank you so much. I want to make sure that Leora's comment in the chat makes it into the recording. Just wondering, we won't have time to answer it, but wondering about lactating caregivers like wet nurses, or in communities where people nurse each other's children, and thinking about that and how that applies in this. I want to let everyone know, a lot of you realize that we learned that the breakout room system is very difficult for people with iPhones and iPads. You actually need to tell us what room, and we need to assign you. So let's go back into the main room, and you'll have a chance to put into the chat which of the next 2 sessions you'd like to do, and we'll see if we can get you into the right room fast enough. And if not, we'll have another system entirely for the 3rd session. So thank you so much, Rabbi Shalom. We look forward to seeing a lot more of you very soon here in our community.
Chag Sameach. Thank you so much.
That
Yasher
was
Koach
incredible.
Stavro.
Thank you so much. I learned.
Yasher Koach. Adoraba.
Yeah, Chag Sameach.
Shabbat shalom.
Chag Sameach. Thank you.